Might have to make it like an
We'll
annual
have to
thing,
spring it
but we'll
on
see.
Dan, though.
Yeah. We should. That'd actually be hilarious if we didn't say anything and just surprised him, got on an episode and started recording, and you and I just started talking about Scotch.
He'd probably log off in the middle of it.
Yeah.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
And I am also Jake.
And this is the final episode of Scotch Matters.
Boo. Although most people listening are probably excited, or actually they probably are excited because all the bourbon heads have probably given up by now on Scotch Matters. But we're here to bring you the last episode of Scotch Matters, and it's a very exciting one. We were just talking about how there's actually a lot to talk about with this region, and it gets me excited. I would probably say it's my second favorite region behind Islay. So it should be fun. There's only officially 3 distilleries on this region, but it's going to be a jam-packed episode.
Yes,
I think.
So we'll get a little more in depth about the actual distilleries, which is cool because there are only 3. And I am excited for this one. We're talking about Campbeltown, and Campbeltown is my favorite Scotch region. So I'm excited to talk about it. As you can see,
Campbeltown Funk.
I've got a shitload of Springbank and Springbank affiliated whiskey next to me. If you're watching the video, it's like I just love the range that they produce in this region. Everything from unpeated to heavily peated whiskey. So lots of cool stuff in this region of Scotland. So let's just jump into it.
So first off, if there was one word to describe Campbeltown, I think it's funky.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people call it the Campbeltown Funk.
Yep.
And and you get a lot of mustiness. But like you said, there's also a wide variety of flavors that you can pull as far as like peat levels, earthiness. Some are definitely a little more sweet, and casks too that are used to age and finish are all over the place. It's not like certain regions where they're kind of tied to one traditional way of doing it. So you can get a much larger variety of flavors within this region, especially because especially with there only being 3 official distilleries. I think you won't find this range of flavors anywhere else in the world with any type of whiskey coming from the same area.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. So
Thank
for
you.
those that don't know, Campbeltown is kind of southwest on like a peninsula, coming off of like the main body of Scotland. It's just a little bit northwest of the lowlands, and it's southeast of Islay. So it's nestled right between Islay and the lowlands, and gets a lot of that same kind of access to the sea, that Islay is pretty heavily known for. We've talked quite a bit about with Speyside as well. Some of that like salty influence definitely shows in these whiskeys. Though I'd say it's not as pronounced as some of the Speyside and Islay whiskeys, but it's there. So this is a pretty interesting region. Like we said, this is the lowest density distillery region in Scotland, with only 3 operational distilleries. At one point, it used to be the largest distilling region in Scotland, and basically a perfect storm of like prohibition and just dwindling interest forced almost every distillery to close down in Campbelltown, leaving Springbank, which I believe is the biggest of the three, Glengyle, and Glen Scotia as the only remaining operational. I was told a while ago that three distilleries doesn't actually qualify as a region. So what Springbank did was just kind of spun off like two separate label distilleries in order to get the like required minimum number of distilleries in the region to keep
I
Campbelltown as a classification.
Yeah, I was gonna say I actually think three is the minimum, but I
Okay.
believe Springbank did start those other brands as separate distilleries just to ensure that if the other distilleries went under, they would still be classified as a region.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost like an insurance policy to start these other registered distilleries, but really they're kind of operating under one. I don't know if it's one roof, but one location where they're producing Longgrow and Hazelburn and Springbank out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I think it's one like big campus kind of with
Yeah,
different distilling like buildings on it.
and it's
Um,
it's kind of wild that this was the biggest region at one point, and now
mhm,
definitely by far the smallest. But I was also reading up on that, and one of the other factors as why they kind of went downhill was because they were just known for producing a lot of volume and not as good quality.
mhm.
So that kind of played a part of it too. Is once these other regions started producing a little bit more quality, people started to look elsewhere for whiskey, and for a little bit, they were known as just kind of a cheap blended whiskey region.
Yeah, yeah. So touch on flavor a little bit more. Um, Wikipedia's assessment calls Springbank malts robust and smoky with hints of their maritime roots. Like I said, you get some of that seaside influence. Glen Scotia are lighter with grassy notes. And then Glengyle is lighter and sweeter, but with distinctive oily and salty notes. Um, I think I've tried Glen Scotia and most of the Springbank lineup, and like Jake, you mentioned earlier, like they're all wildly different and have like extremely like unique kind of profiles. And it's really cool to see that because we've kind of talked a lot about how the regions have these like distinct kind of um, standards or whatever you want to call it, and then we go to Campbelltown
Expectations.
and it kind of throws that out the window, and it's like, yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, you're
Campbelltown
gonna
kind
get
of
something
inverts that.
funky and a little bit musty,
Mhm.
but other than that, you're gonna get a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it makes it a really fun for a whiskey drinker to kind of explore the different flavors that come from this one region.
Mhm. Yeah, so there's three new distilleries that are supposedly going to be opening up in the region,
Ooh,
which is cool. And like one of the things that we've talked about before in the US are these like revivals of like old brands and a lot of like, the growing, craft market in the US. And it's good to see that this is like something that's somewhat universal in the spirits industry, because there's a lot of history in Scotland and a lot of potential for these old brands to be revived, and for new brands to come in, and especially in a quote unquote underserved area like Campbelltown.
yeah, and something interesting to talk about. when we kind of mentioned how uh, originally they were thought of as a cheaper whiskey and not as good quality. Um, a whiskey to bring up is the Campbeltown Lock, which I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
you might have, or I know, or is it right there on the
Yeah.
front row of the table there? Yeah. So the Campbelltown Lock, that was a really old brand that used to be a blend of a little bit of single malt and a lot of grain whiskey, and that was kind of like the region's house whiskey, if you will.
Hmm.
And that is a new label that just got revived, and it's a blend of all five distilleries on Campbelltown. That's sort of a newer release. I think it just came out a year or two ago. But if you want just a good representation of what Campbelltown Scotch tastes like, that Campbelltown Lock, technically can't call it a single malt because it is a blend of these five distilleries, but it's a blend of five different single malts, and it'll do a really good job of just showing you what Campbelltown is like. And if you don't like that whiskey at all, you can still find other things that you may like on Campbelltown, but it just kind of brings together a little bit of the flavors from each distillery and definitely showcases that mustiness. So that was going to be my coupon giveaway, but I don't know if I can give it away just yet. I'll make you guys listen to the whole episode. But that's a really good one, a good starting point. And
Hmm.
another thing to mention with all the whiskeys from this region is they're not too easy to find. Whenever
Yeah.
Springbank and Hazelburn and Longrow come into stock, we usually get between 1 and 3 bottles of anything, and you'd be surprised. Like they will sell out and disappear, usually within an hour that we post them on our site. So there's people that know about this region. Their Scotch is probably the most sought after out of any distillery out there. But only Scotch hunters or Scotch people really know about them, and will jump on it. To any other whiskey person, it's just, oh, more Springbank, whatever. Um,
Mhm.
but the stuff's actually kind of hard to get right now, and that's just because, like we talked about, there's only a couple distilleries there. They're only producing so much, and Scotch in every other country in the world pretty much dominates bourbon sales. So here we don't get as much, and yeah, it's in pretty high demand around the world.
Yeah. It's it's definitely interesting. Going, might as well jump into Springbank. So they're only putting out 750,000 liters every year, which is pretty low for such a large operation. I don't think that incorporates the Hazelburn or Longrow, distilleries, but even just for Springbank itself, that's quite low for the largest producer in the Campbelltown region. Um, so with that in mind, that kind of explains why these are so hard to find, and then why they're so sought after. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
so Springbank was started by J&A Mitchell Company, which also owns Glengyle, um, which Glengyle is actually the oldest independent bottler, which is pretty
Hmm.
interesting. But Springbank was founded in 1828, which is pretty crazy. It went through several closures and reopenings, starting with Prohibition in the United States, which heavily affected Scotch sales and production because the United States is such a big consumer. It reopened in 1936, and then it was closed down in 1979 and reopened in 1989 due to some economic issues in the UK. So that it's not often that you see multiple survival uh, or a distillery survive multiple closures, which is pretty interesting. Um, then Hazelburn is actually the newest brand, which started in 1997, which is pretty interesting. And like Jake said, Hazelburn, Longrow, and Springbank are the three brands that Springbank produces. Hazelburn is bottled as a 10-year, a 12-year, and then I'm drinking the 15-year Oloroso matured, which
Ooh.
is unbelievably good. You can see it's like almost black.
Yeah, I
It's
was gonna say
super
like the
dark.
the video on here doesn't do it justice, but it is one of the darkest whiskeys out there.
Yeah, it's delicious. It's absolutely fantastic, and very hard to find. So, thanks to Gold
It's
Eagle.
that's it's one of those where we get one bottle when it comes in, and I think you've sniped like the last couple from us, or maybe just the last one, but
Just the last one.
um, last one, yeah. But like I said, like people, Scotch people, whiskey enthusiasts who are into whiskey outside of just American whiskey know about this brand, and when they see it pop
Mhm.
up, it's almost like an instant buy every time.
Yeah, for sure. Hazelburn is unpeated, and like it's completely unpeated. It's definitely reflected in the flavor. If you can find the Hazelburn 10, I would highly recommend it, from the Springbank lineup. If you're looking to try something from Campbeltown, this is like your best entry point if you're not a fan of peated whiskeys. Oops. But like we said, I think Hazelburn is pretty difficult to find. Um, it's one of those that only comes in small batches, I think. But if you do come across it, it's absolutely worth picking up. So next is Longrow, which is a heavily peated single malt. It is also absolutely fantastic. Um, it's got a lot of like really earthy, like funky notes, and has that like what a lot of people refer to as like motor oil or like industrial kind of like flavor. Um, I don't get that, but like whatever it is tastes like really cool. And I just thoroughly enjoy it. Um, and then Springbank is like, I guess, the flagship brand kind of. So the 10-year is like the main uh, release. Then there's 12 and 15 and
They go up
up
to
and up.
18 and 21. But
Mhm.
what's crazy about the Springbank 21 year is I think it was a year or two ago, probably a year and a half ago, we received one bottle of the Springbank 21 year, and it was in our system at 89.99 a bottle, and the suggested retail, you'll never guess it, $700. That's how much it went up in price. Over
Wow.
7 times it went up in price, and I don't remember the last time we got it before that. It's been some years because it was probably before I started working at the store. But that just
Mhm.
shows like kind of how rare and hard to find these whiskeys are and sought after because they can charge these prices, and it sold out within seconds after we posted it. Um, Another thing to mention, which I just learned in doing my research while we were recording, is Kilcurran is actually
Mhm.
the brand that Glengyle produces. So the Glengyle distillery, you will always see it under the name Kilcurran, and the reason why they did that is because there's a Highland distillery, um, also named Glengyle, a blended malt, and they didn't
Mhm.
want it to get confused by that. So Kilcurran is Glengyle's whiskey. So, I mean, I guess like because J&A Mitchell and Co. own all four of those technically, like they're kind of all being produced, separately, and then you have Glen Scotia. So there's really only like two big players in Campbeltown
Mm-hmm.
Scotch.
Yeah, and I was gonna say Kilkerran is very similar to the Springbank, Long Row, and Hazelburn.
And they're all bottled in the same shaped bottle.
Yes, and like Kilkerran is also a really nice, I believe, unpeated. Though they do produce a Kilkerran that specifically says that it's heavily peated.
Yeah, they
If you want
do.
to try
They
it
do.
with peat,
They do both. But yeah, but yeah,
yeah, Kilkerran is excellent as well. But yeah, the one thing I do like about all of the J&A Mitchell products or Glengyle products is that all of their labels are like really shitty and like plain.
yeah, uh-huh.
Like they're like the most fancy one is probably the Hazelburn with this like fake silver like metal type
And the,
thing. And
and they
it's
have like
like
kind of weird figures on them. Like the Kilcurran especially has like weird little people on them, like cartoon characters. Um,
it's like a steeple or like a church steeple, but it
yeah,
looks like you're looking at it through like prison bars, which is kind of weird.
yes, they're they
Yeah.
they don't care about marketing. They know their whiskey is that good and that people will
Hmm.
buy it. And it's almost like they're playing the Buffalo Trace game, but
Yeah.
they're not. Like they're keep creating these new labels and new whiskeys, but they're just really not producing a lot. And Scotch is so much more popular and in demand across the world than bourbon is. So they're just kind of naturally getting this following that allows them to sell whatever they produce.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean that's the Springbank family basically. I like everything they make. They're probably my favorite Scotch distillery. It's just there's so much variety within these three or four brands if you want to lump Kilkerran in as well.
Mm-hmm.
But let's move over to Glen Scotia because I love Glen Scotia as well.
Glen
So,
Scotia's awesome. Shout out to Ian McAllister, their master distiller. We were fortunate enough to host him a couple months back. I think it was late 2023. We had him for a master class. Just learned a ton that night. And again, like their whiskeys are from top to bottom. Everything is phenomenal. Everything is unique. The Victoriana, which is what Jake has there, is truly a special whiskey. It's cash strength. It's a little bit peaty. Can be very offensive to those who don't like single malt Scotch, especially Campbeltown single malt Scotch. But we can't promote that one too much because that one's also very, very hard to come by. But if I remember correctly from that night, the 18 year was truly spectacular. The double cask for the price and the availability is a really, really good entry point. Being aged in that secondary oak kind of mellows out a lot of the scotchy notes and makes it drink almost more bourbon like. But they're just another distillery that everything they're producing top to bottom is unique, and it's going to be great quality.
mm-hmm.
You were at that class, right?
No, I missed that
Oh,
one.
damn.
I was traveling for work, I think, and I was
Mm-hmm.
pissed because you kept hyping it up to me, and then a work thing came up.
Yeah,
So,
no, that was a good night. That was definitely one of the more memorable ones. And having their distiller there always makes it special. But to have someone
mm-hmm.
from Campbelltown who's lived there his whole life and just a super, super funny and personable guy. But
Yeah,
yeah, that Victoriana.
the Victoriana is excellent. I will promote it because It's very good, and like Jake said, it's cast strength, non-chill filtered. This drinks like a peated bourbon. Like it's just such a flavor bomb. I highly recommend it. Like you said, it is a little bit harder to come by, um, but it's worth picking up if you see it. It's just very very
I'll be
good.
honest.
And again, like cast strength Scotch is hard to come by.
Yeah.
Period. So it's a good
So
offering.
as of this recording, which is on Wednesday, and this episode is going to air on Sunday, we do have 2 bottles in stock. And the only reason why we have some bottles is because I had somebody tell me that their bucket list whiskey to find. He had like 8 things on there. Like they were pretty much all your birthday bourbons and Van Winkles and Stags and stuff like that. And then on there was the Glen Scotia Victoriana. And I was like, I mean, we might be able to get that. We had that in here on the shelf about 4 or 5 months ago when we did a masterclass with them. So I reached out to the distributor and asked if they had any, and they said they had 4 bottles that were locked up on allocation, and if we wanted them, we could have them. And we took them. So there's 2 bottles in stock. If you're an early listener to this episode, I would highly recommend snagging them because it
If you don't, I will.
Jake might snag them right now before the episode's over. So that was probably not even worth saying, but I think it's an annual release, so eventually we will get more. But it's for sure not one that you see all the time compared to their other whiskeys, which are also a little kind of sparse. But we can get most of their other stuff. So but yeah, if you're an early listener, don't even hesitate. Just go on there and snag those up. I think they're $90, 89.99, and it is
Which is like a great
yeah
value
for cash strength.
for a Scotch that's cast
Yeah,
strength and from such good
yeah.
quality. Yeah, I highly recommend it. Yeah. So I mean, like all of these are fantastic. If I'm gonna make one recommendation for the bourbon drinker, I'd probably go with the Campbeltown Lock because it's readily available or more readily available.
It does have a little bit of peat though, just to warn the average bourbon drinker.
Yeah, it's but it's not really that noticeable.
No, it's not, and it's a nice change of pace. It's very light, but also like how
Mhm.
unique is that for 5 distilleries and the only 5 distilleries on the region to come together and say, "Hey, we're going to produce a blended whiskey together." And part of the reason why they did that was because they don't have the best representation on store shelves because they just don't have enough whiskey that they can produce. So they kind of
Mhm.
wanted Campbelltown to be present on shelves. I mean, I think it's $69.99. Pretty sure that's correct. And like I said, just you don't see. Actually, 5 bourbon distilleries did do that. Maybe it was 6, but a couple of them did do that last year. The Bardstown collection, and those bottles are like
Mhm.
$250 and impossible to find. You got to wait in line outside one of the distilleries and get lucky on a random day to get that. So that's the only other whiskey I've heard of that kind of combines multiple distilleries into one as a blended whiskey. And not only is it good.
There's gonna be the Distillinois
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
group
that
is gonna do that
didn't
too,
didn't they do something
which
like
I'm
that a
excited.
couple years ago too?
I think they
Mm-hmm.
did. But yeah, I'm excited to go to that event. It's in a couple weeks,
Oh
I
yeah,
think.
yeah. No, that's super cool. But yeah, to have 5 distilleries come together, and not only is it good, but it gives you a really good idea and representation of what Campbelltown tastes like, and just kind of combines all these different flavors into one drink. So we're here.
Hmm.
Let's give the coupon code. It's going to be BM Lock, but Lock is spelled LOCH. So BMLOCH. Take 10% off a bottle of Campbeltown Lock. We have decent inventory right now. This is also another whiskey that we can't get all the time, but it seems like it's much easier for us to keep on the shelves than anything else from Campbeltown. So would definitely recommend snagging one of those bottles, BM Lock, for 10% off at goldeaglewine.com or on our app.
Yeah, and just for a comparison, this is the Hazelburn 15 and the Campbeltown Lock, and they're almost the same shade. So there's definitely some good, like, finished Scotch going into the
And
Campbeltown
definitely
Lock,
some
and
age.
it's very complex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely some age. And the Glen Scotia is actually pretty dark as well. It's in a green bottle, so you can't tell that well, but it's fairly dark compared to like the Kilkerran, which is, you know, a bit lighter. And the Hazelburn is very light. Yeah, so I think you know, this is the final episode, so I think it's time to do a little bit of reflection on Scotch overall. I think one of the biggest things that people are in general going to, you know, pick at is obviously the peat. I hated peated whiskey when I first tried. I think it was a Lafroig quarter cask. It was the first Scotch I ever tried, and I thought it was like drinking an ashtray.
I think I've heard this story on this podcast before. So yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I've told it before. So, and it was not enjoyable at that time. Granted, the only whiskeys I had really drank up to that point neat were probably Jameson and Jack Daniel's No. 7. So
Lafroig's not a friendly place to start either.
No. So all that to say, if you've had a peated Scotch in the past and disliked it, it's worth trying to revisit something. One, because you may have tried one from a region and that might not be your type of flavor profile. It's probably worth trying a Scotch that's peated from a different region to see if you enjoy it. The first peated Scotch that I tried after that Lafroig quarter cask was like 10 years later at the Kilkerran Masterclass. And I liked every single whiskey that I tried at that masterclass.
Kilhoman, I think.
I think shortly after that was, or yeah, sorry, Kilhoman. Yeah, I liked everything we tried that night, and almost all of those are.
Yeah, and I remember you were like, I think I'm pretty sure I remember talking to you about going to this master class, and you were, I don't really like Scotch, or I'm not really into Scotch, and then I was like, just come, like, trust me.
Like Scotch, and you were,
it's
you talked me into it, and I was like, okay, well. And I know that like tickets were light for that one, so I was like, okay, I'll show up and like, be supportive, you know. And yeah, I liked everything I tried that night. And then after that was the Glenallachie, which is, I think there was only one peated Scotch, which was their special release actually. But I was the only one at the table that actually liked it out of my group of friends. And then from there, you know, I asked you to recommend something. You recommended Talisker, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then from there, I've just kept trying different things, and I found, you know, that I really, really like the Campbeltown profile. So like, and like, I do enjoy Isla as well. Probably my second favorite region is Speyside, followed by Isla. But yeah, I mean, again, all that to say, gives things a shot because it's not always as like cut and dry as you think it is. That like, oh, this tastes like pure smoke. Like there's lots of wide variation in how much peat is actually in Scotch whiskey. You just have to find ones that are within your like tolerance level or whatever
Yeah, and
you
I
want
was
to
gonna say
call it.
too, I guarantee you, as a bourbon drinker, your first time trying bourbon, you didn't love it. Like every
Mm-hmm.
whiskey's an acquired taste. Every different style of whiskey is an acquired taste. Our taste buds change a lot. Not only like as what we eat or drink that day, but also as we age, our taste buds change a lot. So there's never a reason to completely cut something out and not go back to it later on. But for me, I love Scotch. I find it sometimes to be a lot more complex than bourbon. There's a time and a place for each one. I still
Mm-hmm.
definitely will say my heart is with bourbon, probably, and American whiskey. Just being from here and going to Kentucky so many times a year, I'll probably never put Scotch before bourbon, but my personal collection is probably split evenly. I think there's just a lot more depth in certain Scotch whiskeys than you can find in bourbon, and the price with bourbon has just gone up a lot. I would say in the last 5 years compared to what Scotch was. I mean, 5 years ago, Scotch took a pretty good price increase, but things have actually come down a little bit and kind of mellowed out, whereas bourbon just kind of keeps going up and up and up. So, um, I think it's keep an open mind. Don't rule out Scotch and jump on the Scotch master classes that we come out with. We just posted today. We're doing a
Mm-hmm.
Balvenie and Glenfiddich master class, June 25th, and we're going to taste 11 different whiskeys, and none of those are really peated. So they're very bourbon friendly. And we're going to be tasting some expensive bottles for $35 to get in. You're going to get to taste 11 whiskeys, and Balvenie 21 year, Glenfiddich 21 year, and 23 year. So there's going to be some pretty good bottles being poured that night. And that's a great place to start if you're interested or curious because of these podcasts. I would highly recommend signing up for that masterclass. Rick Hollander, who has over 30 years of experience in the industry working with those brands, will be there. And there's going to be a ton of knowledge shared and a lot of good whiskey to be tasted.
Yeah, and if you didn't go to the Ben
Mm,
Riach, Glenglassaugh, and I can't remember the third one,
Glendronach,
Glen Glendronach,
our favorite.
the High Roller Masterclass for that was wild. Tasting scotches that are like 40 years old was absolutely incredible. And probably will never happen to me
Yeah, I
again
mean,
unless I know
to
someone
to
that
be
has it.
in that setting and try all those whiskeys at once is truly special. And $35 might get you a pour of Balvenie
Mhm.
21 year at a bar. Um, but for this master class, you'll get to try that and 10 other whiskeys, get cheese board, pizza, and a good hour long presentation with uh, one of the most knowledgeable people in the industry there to kind of guide you through that tasting. So that's it's going to be a special
Mhm.
night. It's going to be a fun night. It's a day after my birthday, so I might be a little hungover, but we'll be partying on and celebrating that night. But yeah, definitely sign up for that if you're around on June 25th.
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
And
Definitely
the
worth
Glendronach
going
and
to
Glen
that.
Glasgow one was $70, and that one sold out, and we had like 15 people on the wait list. So this one just hit the app and website today. So if you're listening to this episode early, I would definitely snag your ticket sooner rather than later.
Mhm.
And it's half the price,
Absolutely.
$35.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a fan of both Belvini and Glenfiddich as well. Those are both Speyside, I
Highland
think,
or Speyside?
or
Yeah,
Belvini, I think, is
okay.
Speyside.
Yeah, they might
Glenfiddich
both
might
be
be
Speyside.
Highland.
We'll learn on June 25th if you want
I
to
can't
figure it
remember.
out with
Yeah.
us.
All right. Yeah. Next week we're back to bourbon. So everyone can celebrate. Um, oh, can we reveal
Yeah, I
our
mean,
special guest?
I would
Or
say like this isn't 100% set in stone, but I would say 99% sure we're gonna be talking about Chattanooga with one of their distillery reps. So I know that's a distillery that you and I both really, really love. It's on my bucket list to go
Mhm.
and visit that distillery. And I can't say that about many other American distilleries. So yeah, that's going to be a really good episode, I think. Producing some of the best craft whiskey in the country
and
and unique.
unique craft whiskey.
Yeah,
Very, very interesting
yeah,
high
and
malt
when
mash bill. So
yeah, and
I'm
when I think
excited to
of
talk about that
experimental American whiskey, I think of Chattanooga. These guys are pushing the limits,
for
pushing the
sure.
boundaries when it comes to distilling whiskey. So this is for sure going to be a good episode.
Like multiple experiments every year
I
that
mean,
they're
I wouldn't even say
releasing. So yeah,
multiple. I would
very cool.
say close to 100 different, maybe not that much, but at least like 25, 30 different experimental whiskeys that they release out of their. They have a normal distillery, and then they have a strictly experimental distillery where they're just running small batch distillations, and a lot of things that they do they will never make again. They're just strictly experimental.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's going to be a fun episode. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'll be cool. I'm excited. All right. Yeah. Uh, go try Scotch. It's good. Ron Burgundy likes it,
if you
so
if
you
you
should
stuck
too.
with us through all 5 episodes here on Scotch Matters, hats off to you. Thank you. We appreciate it. We really enjoy
Yeah.
something a little different once in a while. So this was fun for us to talk about
Hmm.
Scotch and do something a little off the beaten path.
Yeah, for sure. If at a very minimum, think of Scotch as, like Jake said, just something a
Yeah.
little bit different
Mm-hmm.
than your typical bourbon. You know, like it's a nice little deviation from the norm
Absolutely.
here in America. So yeah, give it a shot. There's plenty of things that you can try at Gold Eagle. Everything that's on the bar is great. I've tried a lot of it
We keep a
in one way or
pretty
another.
small section of
So yeah.
scotch just because sadly it doesn't get ordered as much as bourbon. So yes, everything we put on the bar is stuff that is either very limited or, in our opinion, very, very good quality. So we usually keep about 20, 25 bottles of scotch on the
Mhm.
bar. And that's always changing because the people that are ordering scotch are kind of going through it. So yeah, come check us out at the bar, taste some things, use that coupon code BMLOCK for 10% off the blended malt from Campbeltown. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. Did you do your Gold
Mm,
Eagle plug yet?
I think I plugged Gold Eagle a lot on this episode, so I didn't want to overdo it. But yeah, goldeaglewine.com. See our full inventory, shop online, sign up for our events, and follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine. Follow us on Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. And then you can go ahead and plug Bourbon Matters.
You can watch us and listen to us on Spotify and YouTube. Listen to us in the podcast format on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Bourbon Matters. Email us at bourbonmatterspodcast@gmail.com. Or no, bourbonmatters@gmail.com. The website is bourbonmatterspodcast.com. Make sure you subscribe, like, share with your friends. Click the notification bell, all that stuff. Leave comments. Tell us what you think about Scotch Matters. We've gotten some comments on the past couple episodes. Shout out to Jake Gorman, his love for Speyside. I know he enjoyed the series because I
He
chatted with
was
him a little bit about it.
he's a
But
very
yeah, a
good
lot.
listener and supporter. He's usually the first one to use the coupon
Mhm.
code. So uh, if he doesn't buy the Victoriana, it means we're probably sold out, or he probably already has one because I'm pretty sure he was at that masterclass. But yeah, thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate it. It makes it makes it fun for us to get on here and just chat about whiskey and know that some people are listening to our nonsense rambling.
Yeah, and another shout out to my buddy Jimmy, who introduced me to Hazelburn and Springbank and all of these Campbeltown whiskeys. Um, I didn't want to try them because he told me they tasted like motor oil, but he was super excited about it, so I gave it a shot, and I loved all of them. So yeah, thanks again to Jimmy for broadening my horizons. All right, we'll see you next week. It's back
Let's
to
go.
bourbon with Chattanooga.
Cheers.
See everybody. Cheers.
That was a good one.